Liho.
你好
It's my great pleasure to be here with you today, to have such a fantastic crowd, all converted to socio-emotional learning, SEL, which we are now seeing how important it is for the challenges of the 21st century. I would like to thank Dr. Hui Tsier for inviting me here. We had the pleasure to meet in another conference in Europe about 4 years ago, when Dr. Tsier was promoting SEL in Europe, what was happening in Taiwan. What I will be doing today in my presentation, as you might know, I come from Europe. Malta is part of the European Union, and have been involved over the past years in working on developing socio-emotional learning in Europe. SEL is on the rise at the moment in Europe. Okay? So what I will be sharing is some insights which we are learning as we try to develop a framework for the European context. However, so hopefully these insights may be helpful in some way or another to the roadmap you are taking here in Taiwan. However, as very well Dr. Tsier said, the task here is to develop your own framework for SEL in Taiwan. One of the lessons we learned in SEL, and this is my last slide, that in order for programs, interventions, curricula to be effective, they need to be culturally sensitive, okay? Homegrown. And it was wonderful to hear the presentation before me by Dr. Lai Jung on the program which has been developed here. And it was a bottom-up program. It arose and homegrown in Taiwan. And maybe that's why it has been so successful. Right, so a brief overview of what we plan to do, but basically I have 3 numbers to follow in this presentation with you. First, 7 reasons why SEL. Now my colleague, Professor Elias, has already told us why SEL, so I can go a little bit fast on that, on the fast track. Then, coming back, focus on the European reality, 3 aspects of the work we are doing in Europe at the moment. First of all, initiatives by the European Union as a commission. I am part of an expert group at the moment working on that. Then a network which was established about 15 years ago to promote SEL in Europe. And finally, the framework we have developed for Europe, a whole school approach to SEL. And finally, 7 quickly pointers on the way forward. Okay? So let's start with the 7 reasons why. And why I'm going along, you can also reflect to what extent what I'm saying here, which is also evidence-based, but mainly westernized research, to what extent it applies to Taiwan, and what adaptation there might need to be. As I said, there is increasing interest in SEL in Europe at the moment, and of course, post-COVID, it's even more, okay, because we all now have seen how important well-being is in education, and that SEL is one of the drivers for well-being and mental health, okay? And it is also seen, SEL, as a tool to address some of the main challenges we are facing. So you can also see to what extent these apply also to your challenges. These are some of the challenges which comes to mind. We are talking about challenges of children and young people. So technology, it's a very safe, a very useful tool, but it could also lead to abuse, cyberbullying, addiction, then mental health issues, loneliness, academic stress, poverty, bullying, migration. These are some of the challenges we are facing, and which we think SEL could be a helpful tool for us to address some of these challenges. Let's start the 7 reasons why SEL, especially from a European perspective, and then you can see to what extent this is also reflects reality. First of all, the rise in mental health issues, mental health difficulties being faced by especially young people in Europe. 10 to 20% of our children experience mental health problems during school life, elementary and high school. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among adolescents in high-income countries, and first in low and middle-income countries. Now, this is very interesting, which brings us to the school context. 50% of mental health problems occur before the age of 14, when children are still at school. So schools have a key role, SEL, to help prevent mental health issues before they develop. And 75% before the age of 24. I think these are very important critical periods for us working on SEL in schools. So I don't want to go into detail of it. These are some statistics in Europe about mental health issues. For example, UNICEF EU study found a study with 10,000 children, 11 to 17. 1 in 5 were growing up unhappy and anxious about the future. And why? Because of the result of bullying, coping with schoolwork, and loneliness. And SEL is a very good avenue there to address these issues. Inchley, she leads a health behavior school checklist with 40 countries in Europe, but as in the United States, Canada as well. She found, when she compared the waves of studies over the last 20 years, that there has been a decline in life satisfaction and increase in loneliness among young people, especially for females. So it appears young female adolescents are most at risk for mental health issues in the European reality, compared to that to your own reality. Okay? And finally, WHO 2021, Europe's children aged 10 to 19 are more likely to experience mental health issues than the global average. So we are even more at risk. The second reason why SEL, COVID, we have heard about the COVID, how it brought about an unprecedented global mental health crisis, okay? Sharp increases in Europe, these are some statistics from Europe, in the rates of depression and anxiety among young people, especially those who are most vulnerable, okay? Such as those with existing mental health issues, migrants, those living in domestic violence, poverty. I won't have to go into detail, but this is a global average by a study by the Lancet just after the outbreak of COVID. And the main finding here is globally there has been an additional 53 million cases of depression and 76 million cases of anxiety disorders over and above the normal. Okay? And as you can see here, the ages, this is for depression and this is for anxiety, the highest levels, okay, were among those, the young people. Okay, so COVID, I think Maurice, my colleague Maurice Elias has made this very clearly, so I can go very briefly. It has provided a challenge to what we call reimagine education, to make education systems and schools more relevant to the challenges being faced by young people and children today. And many of these challenges are not just cognitive, they are socio-emotional and relational. Okay? So the challenge, COVID has indicated that we have to move beyond the narrow sectoral goals, cognitive, for education to become more relevant, caring, and compassionate, promoting well-being and mental health as a core, as a key educational objective, on an equal basis of academic learning. And SEL is a key driver for this movement to promote mental health and well-being in schools. Right. The third reason why there is this increase interest in SEL because research is showing us SEL works. It brings about positive change. And it's not just anecdotal evidence. We have strong, consistent, cross-cultural evidence. Okay? There are so many studies. I just mentioned briefly one study, not to become too heavy with statistics. This was carried out by Christine Cipriano. She's an American psychologist with a big team this year. So she carried what we call a meta-analysis. Okay? So she looked at over 400 studies carried out in the last 20 years. From 53 countries, so it was not just the States or Europe, on socio-emotional SEL universal interventions for the whole group, like we heard today, okay? From kindergarten, nursery to high school, and involving over 500,000 students in these studies. What did they find? They found students who had SEL in their schools, okay? There was an increase, so schools which had SEL, an increase in school climate and sense of safety among the students, okay? There was also a sense of belonging. Schools felt proud of their school. We know that sense of belonging is crucial for academic engagement and for well-being and mental health for children. Especially, we are talking here about critical ages in development. Okay? There were an increase in socio-emotional skills, such as relationships, conflict management, teamwork, emotional regulation, in positive peer relationships, so less bullying, less competition, but more collaboration and supporting each other, more prosocial behaviors, less externalizing behaviors, antisocial behavior, substance use, bullying, violence, less emotional distress, we mentioned suicide, depression, anxiety, loneliness, and higher school functioning. This is very interesting, and my colleague Morris spoke earlier, that socio-emotional learning leads to better academic achievement. They also mentioned, I think I will skip this slide, what is the best way to implement the SEL in order for it to be effective. They made a number of criteria which they found from all these programs what helps SEL programs to be effective. Okay? We don't have time to go into that detail. So we are talking still about the why. Hope we can go a bit faster. I talked about this already. Another reason there is this interest, because we have realized that rather than SEL taking time away from academic learning, this was the fear of some teachers and parents and heads of schools. We are so full, we have no time. Our curriculum is so overcrowded. How can we afford to spend time on SEL? That would lead to an decrease in academic achievement. Evidence shows otherwise. Okay? And why do SEL students have higher academic achievement? Because they feel safe and more connected to the school and learning, because it helps them to build good work habits, to be persistent, believe in themselves, give them confidence, and also build stronger relationships with the teachers. These are all key criteria for academic learning. 5, also, because it's cost-effective. And this is the argument we use with politicians. Okay? So research shows us from studies that there is strong economic and financial returns on investment with costs, which we incur on rehabilitation, on addressing social problems, unemployment, mental health issues, all that budget which we spend on problems, it's 11 times bigger than the 1% we spend on prevention. Okay? Reflect on that. 11 to 1. So if we don't do the prevention, 1% of our budget, we will have to go to the 11% budget. And in Europe, mental health issues last year cost 57.6 billion euros a year. So this is a very good argument for SEL. 6, we still have to. My colleague Maurice Elias talked about this, okay? Because now employers are asking for SEL, because they are seeing that cognitive tasks, academic achievement is not enough to be an effective worker. Okay? So we can go into that. And finally, from neuroscience, when we study the brain and how the brain influences behavior, more and more we are realizing that we are wired genetically to learn in tribes, socially, and that our emotions impact our learning. So we need to address the emotions and the social aspects. You might have heard John Bowlby, the famous school psychologist, on attachment. He underlines how these strong emotional social bonds are so important for us to flourish, even cognitively. Right, so we go to the second part now. So to conclude this part, SEL brought about what you call a paradigm shift, the way we think about education, child development, and child well-being. That education can be about happy, healthy, and achieving children. So in order to have achieving children, we don't need then to stress them out and create problems in other aspects of their development. Okay? They can be achieving, high achieving, but also happy and productive. Right, now Europe, the second part, and we have the three areas of initiatives. I will talk very briefly. So recently there has been a movement for SEL to develop SEL with what we call a European face, with a European identity. And I think this is also what you are trying to do here, okay? SEL with a Taiwanese identity, a homegrown SEL. And for example, we have found some differences in Europe, how SEL education and learning takes place in Europe, in contrast, for example, to the United States. In Europe, we tend to be more flexible and participative and less going by programs. And that reality is very important for SEL to grow healthily in Europe. Also, the European approach is heavily influenced by citizenship education. So what we are suggesting is, as my colleague Maurice said earlier, if we have already an avenue which is working, rather than inventing something new, let's bank on that initiative, citizenship, which is already working, and also attach SEL to that, okay? Rather than adding on. It will help SEL to come in. Right, so there are these three initiatives I will talk very briefly. First of all, the ENSEC network, and this is where myself and Dr. Tsier and his team met, and that's why we are here. Okay? And maybe this could be another possibility here to establish your own SEL network, to bring together academics, practitioners, researchers, policymakers, through a loose network to support each other. It was established in 2017. Okay? It serves a repository for information and data so that we can share knowledge together, and also to facilitate collaboration, also with policy programmers, policy makers, practitioners, and contribute to policy and practice in SEL in Europe. One of the initiatives of ENSEC is to organize a biennial conference. Okay? 2007. Okay? That was the first conference, which led to the establishment of ENSEC. Okay? Second conference was in Turkey. Third conference was in Manchester, University of Manchester, 2011. 2013 in Croatia. 2015 in Lisbon, 2017 in Sweden. We went on a cruise. The conference was on a cruise. I think Dr. Tsier and Dr. Lai Jung were there. Okay? And also in Hungary, 2019, that's where we met the Taiwanese team. Okay? The last conference, it was postponed by 1 year because of COVID. It was in Romania. And the next conference in Greece in September. Right. The second initiative in Europe is that the European Union led to the development of an SEL framework. Okay? As you can see, it's a little bit different from the CASEL framework, American framework, which we saw. And it has 3 pillars, what we call the 3-pillared SEL. So we have first the personal, the emotional. We've got self-regulation, flexibility, talk about resilience here, and well-being. Then we have the social, empathy, communication, and cognitive, and collaboration. And learning to learn is the cognitive, okay, which sometimes is not taken into the framework. We hear about growth mindset, thinking positively, making goals, critical thinking, and managing learning. Right. Another initiative by the European Commission in President, I don't know whether you have heard about President Ursula von der Leyen is the EU President of the EU Commission. She announced in this year a comprehensive approach to mental health as a key initiative for this year. And SEL is one of the drivers of this initiative. Well-being was also one of the 2022 European Year of Youth Key Initiative objectives. In 2022, I was involved a little bit in development of this recommendation. The Council, which is the governing body of the Commission, published Pathways to School Success. You can upload it, download it online, okay, which calls for an integrated and systemic approach to ensure school success for all learners, which includes also well-being and SEL. It aims to help all children and young people reach their full potential by promoting engagement, achievement, and well-being. So well-being SEL is becoming more and more as a core educational objective, not an addendum. Okay? This is, I think, the challenge which forward. And one of the initiatives of this Pathways to School Success was the establishment of an expert group. How can we develop a roadmap for Europe to promote SEL and well-being in schools? And we are a group of 20 people at the moment working on this initiative. We'll be publish the document early next year, and it will be available for everyone. You might also want to have a look to draw some insights from it. Okay, but basically what the brief is to promote mental health and well-being through the curriculum, and here is SEL, resilience and mental health literacy, embedding well-being in school planning and governance process. So it also becomes a process of school evaluation. So schools are evaluated not only on academic achievement, but also on the well-being of the students. So it has more currency. And there are others here, okay, creating a supportive, safe, and inclusive learning environment, developing classroom and school climate, promoting sense of belonging, student engagement, giving voice to the children, collaboration with parents and community. SEL is all there to facilitate these processes. Prevention of violence and cyberbullying in schools. Enhancing the role of school leaders, we know this is very, very important here, and training for educational staff, as we shall see in a minute, if we have time. When we are starting with SEL, as you are doing very well, we don't start with the children. We start with the adults. We cannot expect educators to train children in SEL if they don't have the training and the competencies to do that themselves if they haven't worked on their own SEL. So this is an extremely important point, which is now one of the important objectives at the moment in SEL, training the staff, educating the educators. Okay? So as a result of this initiative, so one of the approaches we are taking in Europe, based on the evidence, this is very important to keep in mind, okay? SEL is an evidence-based practice. We want to make sure when we go into schools and implement these programs, that these programs are going to have an impact, okay, on the targeted objectives. Okay? Increased academic learning, more prosocial behavior, regular school attendance, less bullying. When we are going to adolescence, less mental health issues, less substance use. Okay? These are what we know from the evidence, the positive impacts of SEL when it is implemented well. Okay? So we are suggesting, those of you who are interested, you can have a look at our report. Okay? So this report, if you just Google strengthening social and emotional education, it's another word for SEL. In Europe, we tend to call it social and emotional education. Okay? So here, we developed this whole school approach. I'm going to go very briefly on this because we don't have time. If you are interested, have a look at this document. Okay? So, in this 10 wheel of a whole school approach, I'm going to over these very briefly, and then I'm going to highlight 7 points from this wheel as the recommendations for the way forward. Okay? So let's start going with the wheel. First of all, we have heard about this so well from the previous presentations. We need a curriculum. Okay? And we heard here today a very good practice which is taking place here. A homegrown curriculum developed according to the context of the Taiwanese culture, implemented all the years. It's not just one-off. It's embedded very well in the school curriculum from kindergarten up to the last year of the elementary. We'll be talking about the curriculum a bit later. Then this taught approach, so we need to teach the skills to children. However, this teaching has to take place within an infrastructure which is SEL conducive. Okay? In what way? Where there is a positive classroom climate which is inclusive, safe, children can make mistakes. Rather than competing or bullying each other, they support each other in learning, where they feel very comfortable with the teacher. So that environment is crucial in order for the curriculum to gain ground. Okay? I think we all agree on that, and we'll talk a bit later if we have time. One of the, I think, also of the good practice of the Taiwanese curriculum is, and this is very much reflects in the literature, that it is starting early. Research shows we are more likely to be effective if we start from the basic years in education, because there the brain is still developing. So learning is far easier to take place, rather than later on trying to change, to unlearn what we have learned. So starting at the very years of the school is crucial for SEL to be effective. And we have longitudinal studies which show children who had SEL when they were in the early years of education, when they grew up, in contrast to those who did not have SEL as adults, they had less delinquency, they are more likely to be in employment and also to have promotions in their career, they had more mental health well-being, they had better relationships, also intimate relationships, so all these benefits due to early intervention. Okay, and then student voice. I will talk about this later on. Now, this is one of the new dimensions, at least in Europe, for SEL. The importance that the learners themselves, the students, they join us, adults, in co-designing the curriculum. So it's not a top-down, but we listen to what they like, what they want, and make sure we include that in the curriculum. When we are implementing, we also discuss with them, how would you like this to take place? And we involve them as well in the implementation. And also in the evaluation. We would listen to what they liked, they did not like, what we can change so it will be more relevant. This is extremely important. So we call it also co-design in SEL. I will show you an example if we have time later on. Right? Okay. School climate, we talked about this already. Safe environment, inclusive, everyone has the opportunity to learn equally in the school. Okay? There are values and norms which promote connectedness between us, positive relationships. Parents are welcome in the school, and they are also asked to participate with us in SEL, to share what we call shared responsibility. So SEL is not only the responsibility of the school, but it's the responsibility of the school in collaboration with the parents. Okay? And of course, those who are providing training and support to the school, right? Yeah, so I just talked about that. And the community is also very important, the local community. Research shows that when the local community, like the village or town where the school is situated, was involved to support what we are doing in school, the outcomes, the positive outcomes, were more effective. Okay? And then staff education and well-being. Hopefully, I will talk about that in a minute. Then also, when we talk about SEL, we talk about a universal program, okay? So we are targeting all children, irrespective of background, difficulties they might have, and we have a curriculum for all children. However, some children, because of the background, for example, may already have difficulties, socio-emotional. So I think we need to take into consideration as well for SEL to be effective, especially for these, because these are more at risk, most at risk for SEL, to provide additional support to those children. Universal intervention, they get that like the others. At the same time, they are getting additional support in the competences, skills, which they may be lacking. For example, they may need even extra support in regulating their emotions. Okay? And the last two I will talk about in a minute. Quality adaptation. So what I said earlier, important of adapting any program, initiative, which is coming from another context to our local context. Okay? And with that is quality implementation. So we need to find a balance between make sure that the program is implemented well, because we have evidence. When not all teachers, for example, are on board, some do it, some not do it, some do an activity here when they have time, when they find time. Okay? When it works like that, the program is not likely to have an effect. So it needs to be implemented well. Good training, adequate resources, and making time for the implementation, and also monitoring and providing support and evaluation. Okay? Right, so the last part, so I'm wrapping up in 5-10 minutes, 7 suggestions on the way forward. And I'm taking these from the wheel, so I'm repeating a little bit myself, just going into a bit detail. Okay? Right, so the first one, I think we are all agreed in a way here, at least academically. The issue, as we were talking earlier today, is we know what to do. The issues comes when we come to do it. The hurdles and obstacles, they might be in the way. But one of the key recommendations is SEL needs to be recognized by the educational authorities. So here, this is we made this recommendation for the European states. See in what way it applies to Taiwan, or maybe it's already in place. it needs to be set as a 21st century learning goal, which means that SEL becomes a mandatory key learning goal in schools. Okay? It is integrated into the curriculum, as we have seen, and supported by a systemic whole school approach, okay? Which is well implemented and integrated. Now, in terms of the curriculum, if it's mandatory, we are saying, therefore, there has to be a curriculum. First of all, there is the curricular, as we saw today, the example by Dr. Lai Jung, okay? For example, the happiness curriculum. So students have regular time on the timetable to learn the SEL skills, all students, not when the teacher has time. This is part of the curriculum. However, also, as my colleague, Professor Elias said, another important point is what we call this, cross-curricular. That SEL does not remain as a single subject. It's embedded, infused in science, mathematics, Taiwanese, values, okay? Physical education, drama. If it's embedded in that way, it's more likely to have an impact rather than just teaching. And finally, what we call also, this is now like getting more ground in Europe after COVID, extracurricular activities, because we are learning that children develop these social-emotional competencies, well-being and mental health, through arts education. When they engage in arts and creativity, that is highly therapeutic for young children. Okay? To express, we heard a lot about emotions, to express their emotions, okay? Feel competent. Also, we are learning more and more, and I think I don't need to say it here, because here you have such an active sports culture, okay? Everywhere I see people doing physical activity. So I think in Europe, especially parts of Europe, we can learn a lot from you on this. But we know that physical exercise and sports is highly important for our mental health and well-being. Nowadays, it's one of the recommendations supported by psychiatrists for their clients. Also, mindfulness is becoming more and more an important tool, okay, especially to regulate emotions, and being close to nature, nature-based activities. Okay? You are privileged here to have such wonderful nature around you. One of the suggestions being made in Europe, in some countries, is that each school will have a garden. Okay? So the children can spend some time in that garden to relax. If they don't have space, now some are building gardens on the roofs. They're also having hanging gardens. Okay? But of course, if you have a wonderful park nearby, that's even better. Right, so that's the curriculum. Here is some examples, but we talked about that, the SAFE approach. These are some of the programs which are around, but evidence-based, but as we said, you have your own program. These are also some of the programs we developed in Europe. I was involved in that, resilience curriculum. It's a little bit similar to what I have seen today. Secondly, increasing the currency, the value of SEL, because in a way, sometimes SEL is competing with academic learning, and it finds the door closed because educators say, we have no time. We are so much pressured, we have no time for SEL. So one way of removing that barrier is for increasing the value of SEL by introducing assessment. Because we know what is assessed is taken more seriously in schools. However, what we are suggesting is to avoid making the mistakes of the past, where we start comparing students with each other, schools with each other, country with each other. And then that becomes the opposite of SEL. It creates more risks in students. So first of all, when we are talking about assessment, it needs to be formative, okay? So children and teachers working together to see to what extent they are learning the objectives and how learning can be improved. In that situation, there is no win-lose. Everybody wins, you know? Everybody learns at her own pace. However, we're also suggesting that, so this is a challenge for you here, because this is something which is still developing. Some countries have it, others not. That, you know, you have school inspections, right? So school is evaluated whether it's reaching its objectives, for example, in terms of the academic grades of the students, for instance, academic learning. So we are suggesting also school is evaluated also to what extent it is fostering the well-being and mental health of students. Okay? And SEL is the driver for that. But we need to do it in a way which does not create more stress on schools. Okay? So I think this is what everyone needs to find his or her own way. We suggest more self-improvement than inspectors coming in, you know, and evaluating whether we are doing or not. Okay? We wrote a document for this organization, EU organization, where we propose a formative, inclusive, whole school approach to the assessment of SEL. Okay? Those of you who are interested on how SEL may be assessed in an inclusive, formative way, we also make some examples there. Suggestion number 3, I think we talked about this, is SEL thrives, grows, okay? In the light, as my colleague Maurice Arias was saying, okay? It's drawn according, what sort of light? Okay, in environments which is caring, safe, and inclusive. All children are treated equally, irrespective of wherever they are coming from. Okay? So classrooms, and we have evidence of this as well. We talk about here the classroom climate and also the school climate. So classrooms and whole school norms, values, and behaviors which foster safety, connectedness, relationships, supporting each other, collaboration rather than competing with each other, active student participation, and culturally responsive and inclusive practices, even if they are not called SEL, they are the building blocks for SEL. Okay? So what we said, we need to create this type of culture to support the SEL curriculum. So I'm sure this is not a SEL conducive climate, okay? This may be more here, the teacher and the student, in contrast to the teacher and the student. So the teacher here is telling, okay, don't use punishment to solve problems, but what he is doing. So teachers are not just instructors. They are instructors, but according to the SEL framework, they are also caring educators, mentors, and role models for their students. 4, we talked about this, research is showing more and more that SEL programs and interventions are more likely to be effective if they are homegrown, if they grow up in the context where they take place, rather when they are transported from somewhere else, especially if they are not well adapted, if they are transported, well adapted to the local culture. And one way of doing this is to take what we call a bottom-up participatory approach, where teachers, students, parents, and local community, and also trainers and those who are involved, they sit together in the planning and implementation of SEL initiatives. And parents here are seen as key partners sharing responsibility for SEL. Okay? Also, we talked about this, the importance of community, and having a strong and representative student voice. This is very important, representative, because sometimes we say, we have a school council, so students are represented. Sometimes that school council is only tokenism, we say, they are there, but they don't have a real voice. Sometimes, in fact, they are the voice of the adults in the school. Okay? So it's very important, not only like the high achievers are included in co-design, because especially SEL is extremely important for the low achievers and children with difficulties. Okay? This is a quotation from UNICEF, and it's saying that post-COVID, the COVID has given us the opportunity now that we are reimagining in education. Let's reimagine in education together with the students. Now we have this opportunity. Okay? This is an example of work done by students on an SEL program. If you would like more information, I can give you the paper. Right, so we have three more points. I already talked about this, that we also have to keep in mind the role of SEL, first of all, in preparing all children for the challenges of life, okay? The skills of life. So this is SEL for all, where all children are. Then we have those children here who are at risk or having already socio-emotional behavior problems. So now there is also, especially in CASEL in the States, is working a lot on this, on how SEL can also be relevant to this group of students as well, to prevent mental health, especially on the onset of adolescence, and support those who already have mental health issues. And so one of the suggestions we made, see to what extent it makes sense for you here in Taiwan, that when we have an SEL strategy framework, we need to have a strategic focus on students who are at risk of mental health in order to promote equity, education as an avenue for equity. So reflect a little bit, what type of students here in Taiwan are at risk because of the background they are coming from for mental health issues. So in Europe, I gave you some examples like migration, family instability, poverty, war. Okay, these are some. So we need to identify, because remember what we said earlier, 50% of mental health issues develop before 15 years old in adolescence. So this gives a unique opportunity for schools through SEL, not only SEL, but of course in this conference, we are focusing on SEL, okay? To help these students at their critical time, because they are at risk for becoming, for example, developing depression, anxiety, suicide, to provide timely support in school, because schools have access to all children, okay? One of the few systems we have where all children are there. Okay, to help them avoid mental health issues through timely interventions. 6, we have 2 more points. We have 1 minute, right. So teachers' well-being, I think I'm going to go a bit fast on this, okay? So we need to prioritize within our framework the training and the well-being of teachers. We cannot expect burnt out, emotionally exhausted teachers, overstressed, to promote social-emotional competencies and resilience in their children. So first, we take care of the teachers in order for them to take good care of the students. That's where we need to start, okay? And also, we suggest that teacher education, starting from university, need to be a transformative experience. So teachers need to be trained in becoming also self-aware themselves, to regulate their own emotions, their own anger in the classroom, to be resilient, to manage stress, to build close relationship with students, to be engaged in effective conflict management, collaboration, empathy, so they can understand also where students are coming from, and this leads to intercultural competence, and working also with biases and prejudices they might have. This is extremely important, okay? So we are talking about caring, inclusive, resilient educators, mentors, and role models. I'm going to go a bit fast because time is out. Okay, so one of the suggestions would make that the universities and schools will have a list of competencies teachers will need to have in order to deliver SEL. Okay? Just there are the competencies in order to be a good academic teacher. We are suggesting there needs to be also a list of competencies teachers are expected to have before they start working and start from university. Okay? I talked about well-being. Okay? We proposed, this is a fact sheet we developed as part of the expert group, and we developed a dual model of teacher well-being, focusing on the self, what the teachers can do to take care of their own health, but especially what schools can do and educational authorities can do to support teachers' well-being. Those of you who would like to know more, there is the link. So to conclude, because time is out, quality, implementation, and adaptation. I already talked about this. So we have seen that some excellent SEL programs, state-of-the-art, Rolls-Royce, when they were transported to a different context, without good adaptation, they did not have an impact. Okay? And this last slide, here is some differences, which, for example, between East and West, when we talk about SEL. Okay? As you know, SEL is highly context-dependent, with values, traditions, and culture determining human behavior to a large extent. Okay? So what these values here in Taiwan, I'm sure they are different from what they are in Europe. In order for SEL to be effective and relevant here, it needs to take your own values into consideration. Because sometimes the westernized values may be in conflict with your own values. Okay? And that creates more tension then, rather than facilitate learning. Just an example. We mentioned, for example, the understanding of human development and behavior between the West and East. Of course, it's a big generalization. But we know, for example, especially between the self and the others, that in countries such as Southeast Asia, for instance, okay, the social dimension in SEL, take the CASEL example, appears to be broader than that of CASEL's social awareness and relationship skills. So here, for example, in the Southeast, there is a more importance on the family, interdependence, collectivity, rather than individuality, sense of community, and globalization, and my responsibility for globalization and sustainable development. So if we are going to do things here, we need to take that into consideration. I will close with just one quote. It is easier to build. This was said by an American philosopher, I think 200 years ago, but it is as relevant as it was then as today. The only thing we changed in this quotation is adults, because he wrote man at that time. Now we change that to adults. So it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken adults. And SEL is about health promotion, prevention, and for strong children. Thank you.